phrases, very big words.
Well, good morning and welcome to AM Joy. Donald Trump may have been going for irony Saturday when he spoke at the opening of a civil rights museum in Jackson, Mississippi. It was a speech undermined not just by his entire record on African Americans and other minority communities, but also by the fact that just hours before, in front of a crowd of fervent supporters, he played all the race-baiting, press-bashing hits of the past few years and then threw in a new one, a full-throated endorsement of a certain Alabama Senate candidate who just months ago said this.
What does Trump mean? What does people mean make it great mean?
I think it was great at the time when families were united. Even though we had slavery, they cared for one another. People were strong in the families. Our families were strong. Our country had a direction, and we corrected many of the problems.
Now, even before all the allegations of sexual misconduct emerged, Roy Moore was on the record about longing for the antebellum days of slavery, questioning Barack Obama's birth certificate, and feeling a kinship with Russian leader Vladimir Putin. And now, with polls showing a tight race ahead of the vote on Tuesday, Moore's campaign is warning of, wait for it, voter fraud, and claiming that Soros' army is in the state registering voters. Now, if all this sounds familiar, it's because Donald Trump ran on many of these same positions, and now that it's his Republican Party, it's becoming Roy Moore's party as well. And joining me now is Evan Siegfried, Republican strategist, and Jason Johnson, MSNBC contributor and politics editor for TheRoot.com, as well as Karine Jean-Pierre, senior advisor for MoveOn.org, and Derek Johnson, president and CEO of the NAACP. And Derek, I'm going to come to you first, Mr. NAACP president. I'm going to come to you first. Roy Moore has a history that I think a lot of Americans who are not familiar with him beyond his 10 Commandments fight are just getting to know. And this is actually clipped through for my producers who are not forewarned. There's a BuzzFeed article that talked about Roy Moore back in 1995 addressing a white supremacist group called the Council of Conservative Citizens. He once addressed the semi-annual national conference of that group, the white supremacist group, that alleged that Charleston shooter Dylan Storm Roof cited as a formative influence on his online manifesto. What should people know about Roy Moore's racial views in addition to what we know about his views on LGBT Americans and on things like monuments and his dating predilections?
Well, the CCC is an offshoot of the White Citizens Councils from the 1950s and 60s. It was also the group that was linked to former U.S. Senator Trent Lott. It is a racial hate group headquartered for many years in Mississippi. The mere fact that he would have been invited, accepted the invitation, and spoke to that group speaks volumes to his empathy or his beliefs around race. He is a racist. There's no other way to put it, because anybody who will speak to that group, espouse their interests or support their platform can be nothing else but a racist. And
let me play for our audience some classic Roy Moore doing his birther thing. This is from December of 2016, and this comes from CNN's Andrew Kaczynski. Take a listen to this.
My personal belief is that he wasn't, but that's probably overdone in a few days, unless we get something else to come along.
And Derek, are African Americans in the state familiar? Do they know this part of Roy Moore's history? And do you think that black voters are energized around this race?
Well, when you look at the history of the South, particularly states like Alabama or South Carolina or Mississippi, this type personality have always been around. And African American, we can identify individuals who hold the same views as a Roy Moore. So I will be surprised if there was an African American in Alabama who could not clearly see through or see Roy Moore for who he is. He is someone that has very little race tolerance. For him, the good old days were the days when segregation was in place and perhaps even slavery, because white supremacy is something that many individuals who are similarly situated as he is in their views truly believe in this concept of white supremacy.
Well, and we should note that, you know, African American voters are about 26% of the voters in the state. Even if 100% of the voters turned out, it's not African American voters, Evan, that are going to determine who wins in Alabama. It's going to be white voters who are something like 90+% Republicans. And, you know, Roy Moore is using something out of the Donald Trump playbook to appeal to them. In addition to denying the claims of being a serial child molester, there is a flyer that was put out that is essentially accusing Doug Jones of doing something that is, you know, really not really controversial, but of him publicly supporting NFL players kneeling to protest the national anthem. So he's going for sort of the Donald Trump playbook.
Well, Doug Jones is supporting the First Amendment and the right to kneel and express one's political opinions. My goodness, we've seen time and time again that Roy Moore has no respect for the Constitution. He himself has said that the Constitution is one set of laws, however, God's law supersedes that. And the Constitution was founded on the exact opposite of this. I've never seen Roy Moore devote himself to the Constitution. He's been twice removed from the Alabama State Supreme Court for ignoring federal court orders. So he's shown himself not to be there. And one thing that is really disturbing, right now Roy Moore is going on doors, knocking and asking for people's votes. The only reason he should be going on doors is to tell people he's not allowed within 500 yards of a school. And that's the only thing he should be doing right now for Alabama voters. But Alabama voters are saying, you know what, it's okay because we want to get that vote and Donald Trump's behind it. Donald Trump has opened the door for people to say things that they believed that are not normally acceptable, and it's really moral rot within the Republican Party.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's look at one other. This is a pro-Jones. No, I'm sorry. This is Donald Trump is actually. Let me actually switch to number 6. This is a panel that Frank Luntz did, and Frank Luntz is, of course, a pollster who. You know, he does a lot of focus groups. This is one of the focus groups, and you can hear some voters, some Roy Moore voters, doing exactly what you just talked about, Evan. Take a listen.
Roy Moore is not a miserable man. This man has more integrity than you can find in the entire Congress right now. Don't fall for the George Soros assassination plan. The truth will come out. These women are all going to be proven, just like the 16 that went against President Trump.
So people are essentially not embarrassed about supporting Roy Moore. They're full-throated support of him, and they don't believe his accusers. They think he has integrity.
Well, remember, Roy Moore 2 weeks ago came out and said they are the ones who are doing it. They are George Soros funded. They are Democrats. They are the establishment. The women who are accusing Roy Moore are Republicans who wear MAGA hats. They voted for Donald Trump by their own admission, and now they're being tarred and feathered by their own crowd for having the temerity to actually speak up and say Roy Moore is a child predator. If that doesn't give people pause, then I don't know what will. Yeah. It's very distressing. You
know, it's interesting, and I want to let me come to open this up to Jason and Karine as well. This is a clip that I just saw for the first time last night, actually, and this is Roy Moore talking not just about his views on LGBT Americans, which I don't think will be surprising to people, but also revealing something that, you know, maybe I just haven't been paying attention, his pro-Putin views. So let's take a listen.
To assess what Ronald Reagan would think, I just couldn't simply begin.
But he said that Russia was the focus of evil in the modern world.
You could say that very well about America, couldn't you?
Do you think?
Well, we promote a lot of bad things, you know?
Like?
Same-sex marriage.
That's the very argument that Vladimir Putin makes.
Well, then maybe Putin is right.
And then, Karine, he goes on to speak some pretty good Russian. He sort of greets Vladimir Putin in the Russian language. But it is interesting that he also has this pro-Putin view, and they line up on this idea of being opposed to LGBT rights.
Yeah, not surprising at all, Joy. I think we have to step back for one quick second and remember who had the seat for 20 years, and that is Jeff Sessions. And we have to go back to, if you look back to 1986, Jeff Sessions was deemed to be too racist to become a federal judge, and then 11 years later, Alabama decided that he could be a U.S. senator, and he was in that seat, as I mentioned, for 20 years. And now he's at the Department of Justice, and he's pushing the most rapid and, bigoted, racist pieces of legislation that we haven't seen in a long time coming out of the DOJ. And then the other part about that too is that Roy Moore, in September when he won the runoff, he was already racist. He was already Islamophobic. He was already homophobic, and still he won the runoff by 10 points. And so, this is all before we found out about him being a pedophile. So this is Alabama. this is the state that we're talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, look at the polls here, Jason. You've got another poll that shows the race locked up. And I'm not sure, you know, what to make of all these polls because they'll show Doug Jones up sometimes. These seem to be more in line with the anecdotal evidence that you're hearing on the ground that Roy Moore is genuinely ahead. There's a Gravis poll that asks, do you believe the accusations against Roy Moore? More people believe them than don't believe them. I'm not sure that that's really hurting him, Jason.
No, it's not, Joy. And look, if you look at the history of this state, I went back and looked, you know, when Jeff Sessions ran against Vivian Figueres, when Jeff Sessions ran against Sanchez, I mean, Democrats can't break 40% in this state. They just can't. The fact that Doug Jones is right now around 43 or 44, it's impressive. But think about it. For a Democrat to break 40% in the state, you have to be running against a man who is a clear bigot and an alleged pedophile. Like, that says something about how Alabama voters look at Democrats in general. So, you know, I've always thought Roy Moore was going to win. He's probably going to win by 5, 6, 7 points, and then the Republicans are going to have to deal with that guy talking in the Senate all throughout the 2018 midterms.
And that is the point, Evan, is that if Roy Moore wins, and let's not, you know, call the race before it happens, people still have to vote, but if Roy Moore wins, then your party's stuck with him. And what are they going to do? I mean, they're not going to have the excuse of trying to point to the completely different situation of Al Franken and point at him. He's not going to be there.
Good, because we should judge each case on a case-by-case basis. And Roy Moore still, even if he wins, I don't think they should seat him. It would actually be good for Republicans to stand up and say, we will stand up for women and victims. Cory Gardner's still standing up and saying he shouldn't be seated, and I'm proud of that. Unfortunately, can we get enough Republican senators to do that? No, they're saying, well, we'll let the ethics investigation play out. But my big concern is with ethics investigations is they're toothless. When have they actually achieved results? You have a system built to protect the incumbent, and Roy Moore, if he wins, Wednesday morning, first thing will be the incumbent. The one thing I will say that I think Democrats have going for them politically if Roy Moore wins is that it's going to energize more and more women and be a shot in the arm to organize and move for 2018.
Yeah, and Karine Jean-Pierre, it's also going to refocus people's attention on the guy in the White House that's got some pretty serious allegations hanging out there against him too, and who has inserted himself into this race. Let's listen to Roy Moore's strategist, a guy named Dean Young, who's on This Week on ABC, talking about Trump's role in this Alabama race.
Last night we had Doug Jones, the liberal Democrat, with one of his Senate buddies, Cory Booker, who said that the president should resign. So this is Donald Trump on trial in Alabama. If the people of Alabama vote for this liberal Democrat, Doug Jones, then they're voting against the president who they put in office at the highest level.
So, you know, Karine, you've had Jeff Merkley come out and say that Donald Trump should, you know, that if Al Franken has to step down, Donald Trump should too. Cory Booker said the same thing in Alabama. Are you going to start to hear some of those Democratic women who stood up and said that Al Franken should resign from the Senate if Roy Moore comes in, turn that same vitriol on on Roy Moore, make those same demands of Moore, but also on Donald Trump?
Yes, and that's what Democrats should absolutely be doing, because as they tried to do this week, they now have the moral high ground on this. Okay, if you have the moral high ground on this, let's actually focus on the man who's at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and say to him that he needs to step down. He is a sexual assaulter. We have about more than a dozen women that came out and said this and sound very credible. And if we are in this Me Too movement and we're saying we believe the women, then we should do that. Believe the women and go after the president of the United States, Donald Trump. And it's kind of, it's really troubling, Joy, that Donald Trump is using the prestige and the power of the White House to give a full-throated endorsement and to campaign for a pedophile. People, you know, for credible, people come out and said he is a pedophile for going after 14-year-olds, for going after teenagers. But then, you know, if you think about it, it's not surprising that Donald Trump, who himself would walk through teenage dressing rooms for beauty pageants, is now also endorsing someone who got kicked out, banned from a mall in Alabama for targeting teenagers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to go to Derek Johnson just for one more question, just to go back where we started this segment. Of course, Donald Trump did give that speech in Mississippi at the Civil Rights Museum. I want to get your comments on the boycott of that event by John Lewis, by Benny Thompson of Mississippi. What did you make of that? Was that the most effective way to respond to Donald Trump showing up?
Well, absolutely. The opening of the civil rights movement was an opportunity to celebrate individuals, many of whom are still alive, their accomplishments, their sacrifices, and neither Congressman Thompson, Lewis, or I were willing to cede the stage to give the president a photo op. There is no commitment to the individuals, the values that they stood for, the fight they took on. You think about Medgar Evers. He was fighting to ensure that everyone had access to voting and quality education. The president don't support that. You think about Dr. Robert Smith and Dr. Geithner through the civil rights movement, who said that access to health care was a civil rights, and they fought and created a rural community health center that still exists today. This president don't support having access to health care for all citizens. So why should anyone give the stage to the president so he can have a photo op only to fight against us with the voting commission cutting funds to support all of the things that civil rights workers fought for? Yes, it was the most effective because we're still celebrating the civil rights heroes. We are talking to them. We're going to have another ceremony, but by no means should we have a photo op for the president.
All right, well, Evan, Jason, and Karine will be back in our next hour. Derek Johnson, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. And up next, Trump and his allies in the media have found the real villain in the Russia scandal. I'll tell you who that is after the break.
Can anyone explain to me, anybody at all, how Robert Mueller's investigation can be described as fair, impartial, not biased? A lot of questions, John, being raised about, okay, this team that literally has covered for Hillary Clinton and put all these biased people going after Donald Trump, you know, what would it take to get rid of a special counsel?
It's no coincidence that the only people raising questions about the impartiality of Robert Mueller and his Russia investigation are Donald Trump and his allies, nor that those questions are arising just as Mueller's dogged probe of this rotting fish moves closer to its head. The hunt for something, anything to impugn Mueller has become a white whale of sorts, not only for Fox News hosts, but also, as the Washington Post reported this week, for Republican lawmakers and activists. All of them engaged in what the Post describes as a multi-front attack with one clear goal: to impede Mueller's investigation, dismiss any finding that's unfavorable to Trump, or build a case for Trump to make a Nixonian attempt to fire Mueller outright. And joining me now are former FBI Special Agent Clint Watts, MSNBC Intel analyst Naveed Jamali, Natasha Bertrand, political correspondent for Business Insider, and Scott Dworkin, senior advisor to the Democratic Coalition Against Trump. Thank you all for being here. And Clint, I'm going to start with you. Let's listen to Florida Congressman Ron DeSantis and another congressman named Matt Gaetz questioning the credibility of the FBI. This is extraordinary in a Thursday hearing with the director of that agency, Christopher Wray.
We have a question about how this dossier was generated for political purposes. It ended up in the FBI's possession. What did the FBI do with it?
So we don't know whether Mr. Mueller recruited people as a consequence of their bias. We don't know whether Hillary Clinton was treated as special. We don't know whether the FBI used taxpayer money to go and buy a dossier to discredit the president.
Clint, you were in the FBI. You were a special agent with the FBI. Have you ever heard Republican members, or really Democratic or any members, questioning the core credibility of the FBI?
No, and it's also quite ironic because if you remember a year back in the lead up to the election, some were saying the FBI is Trumpville, that it's overly supportive of Trump. And so the FBI gets battered back and forth because they can't come forward and really defend themselves in these arguments because they're trying to be professionals. What's most alarming about this, both from the Hill and from the president, is they are degrading a U.S. institution, which is law enforcement officers, the FBI, which then not only makes their job harder in this case, but also makes it more difficult for them to mete out justice and do investigations around the country. So why would you want to harm a U.S. institution that is now going around trying to do law enforcement, national security cases, and investigations? Both entities, whether it's the Hill or the president, are just hurting the FBI.
Yeah, absolutely. And Natasha, you had a piece out this week that talked about how some people inside the FBI are feeling about being demonized. And just before I get to that, just to put a pin in what Clint said, this is the excerpt from the late Wayne Barrett, the late great Wayne Barrett, back in November, talking about the sort of Trumpy FBI in the New York region here, and it's hours after Comey's letter about the renewed probe that was leaked on Friday. Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, went on a radio show and attributed the director's surprise action to the pressure of a group of FBI agents who don't look at it politically. The other rumor that I get, Giuliani said, is a kind of revolution going on inside the FBI about the original conclusions not to charge Hillary Clinton being completely unjustified and almost a slap in the face of the FBI's integrity, said Giuliani. I know from former agents, he said, I know that even from a few active agents. So Giuliani was claiming that the FBI actually wanted to go after Hillary Clinton and wasn't able to. Fast forward to today, and Republicans are essentially going the other direction and saying the FBI is not biased, is not complaining that they can't go after Hillary Clinton, but that they're biased in favor of Hillary Clinton. And this after a top FBI official that was assigned to the Mueller probe was removed after sending text messages that were deemed anti-Trump. Tell us a little bit about how all of this is playing inside the agency per your reporting, Natasha.
Right. So I spoke to over a dozen former FBI agents, some of whom retired as recently as this year. And they said that this notion that the FBI is suddenly this bastion for, liberals who are supportive of Hillary Clinton is just absolutely ridiculous. If anything, the Bureau is predominantly a conservative place. Last year, there were multiple reports. Giuliani said himself that he was getting information out of the FBI about Hillary Clinton and about the FBI perhaps reopening the investigation into her email server even before it happened. So someone in the FBI was leaking directly to him. I also spoke to these agents who, many of them worked directly with Peter Strzok. And they told me that he was a professional career FBI agent. He never showed his political biases. He never expressed them, and no one ever really asked because no one really cared. I'm sure that Clint can probably speak to this even better than I can, but the idea that agents are not allowed to have political biases or political beliefs is just pretty ridiculous, according to the ones that I spoke to. The idea is that the FBI screens beforehand to make sure that these agents are able to put aside their beliefs in order to pursue an objective investigation. And if they can't, if they show that they aren't able to, then they aren't allowed in the FBI in the first place. So,
yeah. Clint, does that check out with you? I mean, when FBI agents are allowed to have political beliefs, right?
Absolutely, and they all have the right to vote as well. But when it comes to their job, you're talking about FBI agents working in teams. They follow the letter of the law. They have procedures. They have very strict procedures, and there's a lot of governance and oversight of that. So all of these accusations ultimately don't do anything for the American people and actually harm them.
And Naveed, let me go to you, because you were, when you were working as a double agent, it was the FBI that you were working with, that agency. I want to let you listen to Louis Gohmert of Texas, another congressman, reading off a list of FBI employees to inquire as to their political potential bias. Take a listen.
Are you aware of any of the following people openly aligning themselves with the political bias expressed by McCabe or openly speaking against this administration? First, Carl Gattis.
I'm going to quarrel a little bit with the premise of your question about Deputy Director McCabe.
All right.
As far as Executive Assistant Director Gattis, as I said, he's been a complete professional, and by that I mean to include
Have you heard him open aligning himself with political bias against the Trump administration?
No.
Josh Skule?
No.
Larissa Mincer?
I actually don't know who that is.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Fair enough. Brian Parman?
No.
All right. Thank you.
Naveed, you've briefed members of Congress in the past. I mean, what do you make of what you just saw?
I think it was a clear message that's reading off names, that's essentially threatening FBI agents. And look, these people that he's referring to, these are senior administrative people. These are on the top echelon. This has an impact, as Clint was talking about, to the special agents, the rank and file, the people that actually do things. An assistant director at that level, they're not out in the field. They're not actually doing things. It's the ones that are out in the field. And I still have friends who are counterintelligence, in the counterintelligence division. I spoke to one, and he was telling me about Pete, who was a mentor to him. And he said, when the call came out to join when they were doing a manpower call to join the Mueller investigation, I'm glad I didn't join because I don't want to go through this. And I think that this has an impact. This has an impact on national security, because when you have FBI agents worried that joining an investigation, doing their job, could lead to them being pulled through the mud and having their beliefs exposed and used against them in terms of doing their job, my God, that's a chilling effect. This is not what we should be doing. These are, as Clint said, these are dedicated professionals. Look, Joy, I dealt with these people. I'd go into places places where I was worried if the Russians were going to harm me, and I had to trust them, and I did. And I think that, you know, that trust for me, I wish that America could have that. I know that we don't get to see what the counterintelligence folks do, but they're professionals, and their biases, their beliefs, their, you know, whether they were Democrat or Republican or who they voted for, that didn't impact how they did their job. I mean, they were just devoted and dedicated professionals, and to have them sort of run through the mud here is just, it's disheartening. I mean, it's the only thing I can say.
It's interesting to see the turnabout here, Scott Dworkin, because, you know, Democrats, you know, traditionally have been less trustful of the FBI. You go back to the J. Edgar Hoover days, the persecution of people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You now have Democrats actually defending the agency and Republicans interrogating them and reading off names inside of the walls of Congress. And you've even seen, Scott, I want to get your comments on this turnabout happened at the top of the Republican Party. Former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich, back in May, said this about Robert Mueller, who is the special counsel investigating Russiagate. Robert Mueller is a superb choice to be special counsel. His reputation is impeccable for honesty and integrity. Media should now calm down. Here is the self-same Newt Gingrich on Wednesday on Laura Ingram's show on Fox.
Mueller is corrupt. The senior FBI is corrupt. The system is corrupt.
Scott, are we just in the upside down? What is going on?
Yeah. This is a little bit crazy. I mean, think about it like this. Mueller caught those texts, first of all, so he's tracking everyone's communications, so that's a plus. And when he caught those texts, he removed the FBI agents. So, you know, it's not like he kept them on. If he kept them on, there might be an issue. But the whole idea behind this is absurd. They're trying to concoct another kind of scandal linear to the actual Trump-Russia scandal, and it's just absurd. When you attack the FBI, remember you're attacking former police officers, former people that are military officers, and so it's again attacking our intel agents, and I really, it's just absurd. The whole thing is absurd, and it's really disheartening to see them trying to rip apart our intel agency like this. It's really, really absurd is the only word I can come up with.
Yeah, and Scott, I'm going to stay with you for just a second because we know that from the Hill that Rod Rosenstein, who's the Deputy Attorney General, is set to testify before the House Judiciary Committee next week. Do you detect out there, I know you pay attention a lot to what's going on in sort of the right-wing media world, a push to try to convince Donald Trump to take the chance and fire Bob Mueller?
Yeah, absolutely. No, so what I've heard from the Hill is that he's already talked about it with his counsel, he's talked about it with his advisors, and he's trying to find an opening, and Congress is apparently trying to give it to him. I really don't think that there's going to be an opportunity to, because it looks like Mueller's out in front of this, and it looks like he's got a feel on where they're going to try and go with this, and I don't think that they're going to be successful. I think Mueller's got them outflanked.
And same question to you, Natasha Bertrand, in your reporting. Are you detecting an effort, or at least sort of an increasing effort to try to convince Donald Trump that he could get away with firing Bob Mueller?
There's definitely an effort to discredit the entire investigation. This is kind of the best line that they've been able to say ever since the Strzok text messages came out. That's kind of been the saving grace to politicize, to characterize this investigation as just completely politicized and a witch hunt. But in terms of Trump being able to fire Mueller, that would be a very difficult process. I mean, he would have to get Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein to agree to fire him. And of course, if Rosenstein did so, I mean, we all remember what happened back when he wrote that memo outlining the reasons why Director Comey was no longer fit to serve in the FBI. I mean, there was a huge amount of backlash, and it did a lot of damage to Rosenstein's reputation. So you really have to wonder whether or not he'd be willing to take the fall again by firing Mueller. And then if he were to resign, then Trump would have to appoint someone who's not recused from the Russia investigation, like Sessions, to then actually, you know, undertake those orders and fire Mueller. So it would be an entire process. It would be very lengthy.
Yeah. We shall see. Clint Watts, Naveed Jamali, Natasha Bertrand, thank you very much. Scott Dworkin will be back. And coming up, Pussy Riot is here. Stay with us.
Строить или не строить Новороссию? Конечно, строить. Чем больше России, тем больше удои. Я патриот. И дела выбираю решать не в какой-то там вашей Европе, а на родине, в России матушки предпочитаю. И если брать, убивать, воровать, тут я предан родине. Надеюсь, Володя, Леша Навальный и Петя Павленский тебя больше не побеспокоят.
That was a clip from the feminist punk collective Pussy Riot. Their protest song, Cheka, takes on Russia's criminal justice system and is satirically dedicated to Russia's prosecutor general, Yuri Cheka, an alleged Putin loyalist accused of corruption and having ties to the mafia. Pussy Riot burst onto the world stage 5 years ago when they performed the anti-Putin protest song Punk Prayer at a Moscow cathedral. And the anti-authoritarian movement took on new significance this week when Vladimir Putin announced on Wednesday he would seek re-election in March of 2018. And the one and only Nadia Tolokonikova from Pussy Riot joins me now. Thank you so much, Nadia, for being here.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. I love playing your music. I've been enjoying listening to it. I've been checking it out on YouTube. It's good stuff, and it's also very brave. I mean, you young ladies have gone out there and taken incredible chances in an authoritarian country, the way that Russia is run by Vladimir Putin, to do your music. How do you manage to do that?
We kind of didn't have a choice. You know, when it was announced that Putin will go to the third presidential term, we just decided immediately that we have to form a punk band and protest against it and go to public spaces and perform for real people, for the audience who is not prepared to listen to it. But we wanted to share our message, and that's what we did. We just did what we gotta do. And yep, we ended up in jail, but that's kind of how everybody who is in protests in Russia feel right now. We don't want to go to jail. We want to leave. We want to live our lives. We want to share our lives with our families, with our friends. We wanted to live joyful lives. But we have to be prepared for to go to jail for our beliefs.
Yeah. And, you know, the video, Cheka, not only does it satirize, you know, in really stark visual terms, the Russian sort of criminal justice system, torture, you know, authoritarianism, etc., but it also does go directly after Yuri Cheka, who is the prosecutor general, who's accused of corruption. He's a Putin loyalist. For a lot of Americans, he's also the guy who was supposedly going to offer dirt on Hillary Clinton in that infamous Donald Trump Jr. meeting. How much are, you know, young Russians following what's going on this side of the pond, as it were, regarding the Russia scandal and Donald Trump?
It's not actually surprising that Russian prosecutor Yuri Cheka is involved in schemes like that, because that's what he's doing professionally. And we're kind of living in a weird situation where when you have to look for real criminals, you have to look at the government. And, you know, when you're looking for people who have to be really in jail, you have to look at the general prosecutor. So it's extremely logical that he's involved in this scandal.
Yeah. And you know, the lyrics to the little clip of your video that we played at the top, some of the lyrics of it are, "I'm a patriot and I choose to do business here, not in Europe where they got gay people, but here in Mother Russia where I live," et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you're talking about Vladimir Putin's attitude toward the LGBT community, which interestingly enough is shared by some people here on the right in the United States. I want to play you Roy Moore, who, it doesn't matter to you guys in Russia, but he's running for the United States Senate here in Alabama, state of Alabama. Take a listen to this.
That's crazy. We heard about him.
We promote a lot of bad things, you know?
Like?
Same-sex marriage.
That's the very argument that Vladimir Putin makes.
Well, then maybe Putin is right. Maybe he's more kin to me than I know.
What would you say to him?
Здравствуйте, как вы поживаете сегодня?
So first of all, what did Roy Moore say at the end, if you heard him?
I don't know. I want to punch him in the face because, you know, if you live in a country where gay people are kidnapped and tortured, you probably heard about this investigation about gay people in Chechnya, where they are tortured for months, and they can let their torturers let them go just for big sums of money, and you know, some of them are killed. And I have lots of my friends who are gay and trans people, and the level of transphobia and is really big right now. And the problem is our government is really pushing it really hard. They got this law which is called propaganda of gay values, which we don't really understand what does it mean, because, you know, we don't have propaganda of heterosexual values. And the whole notion is really awkward, but supports violence towards LGBTQ community. And, you know, as a person who lives in this reality, I want to punch Roy Moore in the face.
Well, you know, at the same time, you know, for a lot of young Russians, you know, Vladimir Putin has been president, you know, probably most of the time that you've been alive, and he's still trying to run again. There's a guy named Alexei Navalny who's gotten a lot of support among young Russians who are really bravely going out and marching for him. He's an anti-corruption activist. He's been arrested multiple times and charged with crimes, and he's said not to be allowed to run because of that. Do you think that it's possible for Alexei Navalny to win?
It depends. It depends on how hard we will fight. I am a supporter of Alexei Navalny for a long time, and he's our good colleague and friend, and we run lots of operations together with him. We have our own independent media outlet who he supports, and we support his initiatives. He runs an incredible organization which is called Foundation Against Corruption, and he really shows people dirty schemes, how Russian oligarchs and government and criminals are grabbing and murdering Russian people and then using all this money in the West. And I do think that support of Alexei Navalny is very real, and this year really amazing events happened in March and in June. Giant demonstration happened all around Russia, not just in Moscow and St. Petersburg, not just in big regions, but he has a huge support all around Russia. And significantly here is that young people started to support him, because for a lot of people Putin is synonym of something really old and something that really have to go away. And young people, people from high school, they're joining these demonstrations and they're asking for a really simple thing, which is justice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you, you're very brave. You and the other members of Pussy Riot are an inspiration. I think when people talk about Russia, we have to remember that Putin is on to one side, but the people of Russia are really trying to fight to have, you know, just the freedom to live sort of a normal life under a normal democratic sort of regime. So you guys are doing great work. Thank you so much, Nadia Tolokonikova. Hope I pronounced your name correctly. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. My honor to be here.
Thank you. All right. And coming up in our next hour, Donald Trump. Yes, Donald Trump thinks that people should get fired for lying about crowd size. That's true. He thinks that. More AM Show after the break. Clashes and unrest continue in the Middle East after Donald Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. 2 Palestinians were killed by Israeli airstrikes in Gaza on Saturday, bringing the total number of fatalities to 4. The Israeli army shot and killed 2 Palestinians in Gaza on Friday. Jerusalem sits at the center of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Israel considers the Holy City to be its capital, while Palestinians want the eastern part of the city as the capital for their future independent state. And the city is home to sacred sites for Muslims, Jews, and Christians. Joining me now is Ayman Mohyeldin, host of The Breakdown and co-host of First Look, both on Msnbc, meaning you work like 8 days a week. So, and you just came back from the region, I think yesterday?
Literally this morning.
This morning, actually.
This morning, came
fresh off a plane.
Yeah, fresh off a plane.
So, so give us a state of play on the ground. How bad is it? How bad is the violence?
I think you could describe it as low-intensity conflict. There's definitely been skirmishes in various cities all across the occupied West Bank. There have been clashes with the troops. Gaza remains very tense. I really think the question going forward, though, is going to surround the diplomatic maneuvering of the Palestinian Authority. What can they do? What do they want to do? A lot of pressure is now being put on them internally, even within the Palestinian society, because of the fact that they were not able to prevent this. We're not able to even have a say at the table about this, so to speak. So I really think that we are, I don't want to say we're at a transformative point, but we're certainly at a very dangerous point for the future of the Palestinian Authority, what it can do, and what that means for the future of this conflict.
Yeah, we've seen Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority president, say he will not meet with Mike Pence when Mike Pence tours the region. They didn't even get a heads up. And this was the statement from the Palestinian president. We reject the American decision over Jerusalem. With this position, the United States has become no longer qualified to sponsor the peace process. If the United States is now not qualified to sponsor the peace process, then who would the Palestinian Authority turn to?
Well, that's exactly the conundrum that we're in, because on one hand, the Palestinian Authority has been saying to people over the past several decades that they've been part of this process, look, we're going to work with the United States. They bankroll the Palestinian Authority to the tune of a couple $100 million a year. That pays the salaries of PA employees, which then essentially makes the Palestinian Authority survive and function and support the Palestinian people there. But people knew that the United States was not an honest broker. They felt that, but they really couldn't say that as a matter of policy. So the fact that you now have that almost coming out from the Palestinian Authority president, from senior members of the Palestinian leadership across the political factions, really puts the United States in a very difficult position. The European Union is not going to be welcomed by Israel. The European Union is much more neutral on this issue. They don't even recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. You heard very strong words from the British Prime Minister, Theresa May, saying it is illegal Palestinian occupied territories. So the Israelis are very keen on not letting this conflict get internationalized with the presence of the European Union and others. Even things that are controversial, like the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, has much more traction and acceptance in Europe than it does have here in the United States. And so as a result, the Israelis are going to be very keen to not let any other party try to work as a broker and a mediator between the Palestinians and themselves.
And for those who are not familiar with BDS, this boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, there's actually been attempts to legislate against it, that you can't actually do business with state governments if people support it.
And a lot of people are now saying this has become the only alternative, because if you look at what has happened with the peace process over the past 20 years, the so-called Oslo process, that is effectively dead. So Palestinians look at this on the ground and say the Palestinian Authority is not able to deliver state or liberation. The international community has failed us. The only way to make this change, the only way to get the Israeli government to change its policies is through the same tactics and methods that we saw used in South Africa. International corporations, businesses, and others put pressure on the Israeli government by withdrawing and boycotting that country in order to get the government to recognize a change of course.
And very quickly, yesterday we talked about this with Rula Jibril and Bobby Ghosh. They suggested that we may be moving toward one-state solution, meaning that Palestinians fight for equal rights within one state and stop pushing for their own separate state. Could that be happening?
I think we live in a one-state reality. I think the reality is that Israel controls the sovereignty over every part of that territory, from the river to the sea. So what you already have on the ground is a one-state reality. What you don't have is equality among the people there. And I spent a lot of time talking to Palestinians, and you will be surprised. I'm actually going to have this on my show later today. Hearing from Palestinians of all walks of life, this used to be a very intellectual concept, a one-state solution. People that were academics saying, yes, this is where we're going. But we actually spoke to young Palestinian refugees who live in the West Bank, who are now saying this is the only way forward. And I think that's why it's going to be a transformative point in this conflict.
And it would be an interesting change because of the different population growth. Very different, much faster population.
A lot of people say this is an existential threat to Israel if it becomes a one-state.
They'd have to choose apartheid or complete equality and not be a Jewish state, essentially. Well, this is a fascinating conversation. I look forward to hearing it on your show later on. Ayman Mohyeldin, you have to watch Ayman every single. Give us the promo. What time?
Monday through Friday at 5 a.m. and then Sundays at 5 p.m.
It's MS Ayman. Okay, thank you very much, Donald Trump. Next, Donald Trump's war on the media continues. More after the break.